Hello and welcome to this training. In this training we are going to talk about 301 redirects. In this example we might have a new site or for some reason we have an old URL that we want to redirect to a new URL. So let's say for example that we have an old URL that is cooking.aspx, which doesn't work here. This will give me a 404 page. What I want is to automatically redirect this URL to this URL, which is cooking.html. So the first thing that we need to do, actually we have two options. Either we can import CSV files of these redirects that we're going to talk more about, or I can go to marketing, SEO, and then URL rewrites. This section is a Magento core grid, and here we have all of the rewrites or all of the redirects that Magento creates or keeps track of. For example, every category that we have, the real URL is actually, for example, catalog/category/view/id/3. But what we want to show to the customer is cooking.html. So this is the request path, and the actual URL is the target path. So what we can do here is, since we wanted to redirect cooking.aspx, since we want to redirect this URL, we can add this as one new URL. So let's click on Add URL Rewrite, and let's select the store that we want to assign this one to, and currently we only have one, which is the default store view, and the request path is the old URL that is not working, and the target path in this case is cooking without the slash.html. Then we have to choose our redirect type and set this one to a 301, and we can now save this. So every user that goes to this URL will actually be redirected to this URL. So if I try this, let's see what happens. It's not working, and the reason for this is because we need to re-index our URLs. Kind of like how you would want to clear the cache, but in this case we can go to products and categories. Then we can go to any category that we want, and then simply click Save Category without doing anything else. Now we will see that this URL will redirect me to this URL. Another way of testing this is by going to 301redirect.se. This is a Swedish tool. There might be other English tools, but let's try this one as well. So this is the old URL, and we can then click the button, and we see here that the result for this URL is this. So we can here see that this is working. Obviously, this doesn't work if you have a lot of redirects that you want to add, because going in here and adding each redirect one by one, if you have hundreds or thousands of these, that will take you some time. Therefore, what we can do is go to System and then Import Export 301 redirects, and here we can choose only export 301 redirects, and then click the export button. This will then create a file which looks like this, and you can now use this as a template for your redirects. So what you have to change is this column, request path. So let's try electronics electronics. I can't spell, but nevertheless, that I don't know, that ASPX, and I want this URL to redirect to this URL. So let's copy this one over here. So there we go. So the mandatory fields that we need to have here is the store ID. The store ID you will get if you go to stores, all stores, then click on the right column, under the store view column, click here, and from the URL you can actually see here what is the store ID. So in this case it's 1, and that is the one that we want to use, because we don't have any multi-site setup here. The other column that is required is the redirect type, which is 301, and is auto-generated, can either be set to 0 or it can be left empty. We can then repeat this, so we can have, for example, Pablo.html should also go to this URL, and we could also have I don't know, IKEA/electronics. That URL should also go to this one. And then we could have another one for, let's say, food, and then cooking.html should also go to cooking.html. So now we have a file that we can use to import. So let's we can keep the name as it is, or we can rename it if we want. Doesn't really matter, but let's do that. And if I now go back to System, Import Export 301 Redirects, then I can choose my file, which is this one, and then import. Now we can see that the file has successfully been imported. And if I go to Marketing and URL rewrites, we can see that these URLs have been imported here. So the 3 top ones. And if I go to System and Import History, we can here see the history of this, and we see that we have successfully imported 4 rows. Sorry. And if we want, we can also download the file in the future. And that was it. Actually, one more thing that I would want to mention is, let's say that we have a URL that already exists. So let's change this one to something.html. So obviously this first row will be imported because this URL doesn't exist already, but these 3 guys over here, they will not be able to be imported, and we will then get an error. So let's see what happens. So if I go to System, Import Export, and I will now choose the same file again. Let's see if I have saved it. There we go. Let's choose this one, and if I click now on import, it will say that the request path Pablo.html for store ID 1 already exists. So if I go here, we see that this one failed, but we can then assume that the first row was successfully imported. If I go to System and Import History, we can here see that this is the file, and we were only able to import 1 out of 4 rows. Let's say that I want to import the very same file without making any other change. So if I go back here and I choose the same file again and I do import, then it will now complain on the very first row, which is this one, because this one was imported in the previous import. And again, if I go to import history, we see now that we were not able to import any of the 4 rows. And that was it. Now you know how you can export your templates from here, and then simply modify the CSV file and then import the file. Thank you for watching and see you soon again.